Welcome back to Starting Point, everyone. We are following breaking news this morning. The U.S. ambassador to Libya, Christopher Stephens, and 3 other embassy staffers, including one that has been named Sean Smith, they've been killed. A rocket attack hit their car in Benghazi in Libya after protesters had stormed the consulate there.
Also, earlier this morning, the head of Libya's ruling party apologized for the deaths and also said this.
That it is not victory to God's religion or to his prophet in anything if one resorts to this kind of cowardice and dirty criminal acts that took place yesterday in Benghazi.
I want to bring in our panel here who's with us, including Assistant Secretary of State, former Assistant Secretary of State Jamie Rubin. We've been talking all morning about the number of things that were going on yesterday. It was September 11th. There were protests in Cairo and in Benghazi, and this rocket attack on the U.S. ambassador there. We don't know if there's a connection, but it seems an awfully big coincidence. If there is a connection, then what's the significance of that 11 years after September 11th, we still have this going on?
Well, I think the significance, I was at the 9/11 ceremony yesterday, is that America has really started to put, to a degree, 9/11 behind it. We're worried about our economy. We're worried about many, many domestic issues. With bin Laden dead, with so long since 9/11 happening, America as a country is, I wouldn't say fully moved on, but close to moving on. Meanwhile, the world has changed, and it's changed across the Middle East, and Islamic extremism and those who would commit terrorism are still out there. They've come in different forms. They're not in Afghanistan the way they were before 9/11, but they're out there in small groups, small numbers, spread out across North Africa, the Middle East, and South Asia. And it's a problem we're going to live with for a long, long time. Both the political problem of extremists and the military problem of Al-Qaeda.
Jamie, I want to this picks up on what Leslie said earlier, and when you read those words from Ambassador Stephens, he's talking about the hope and people are smiling and how folks are treated. At some point, there's a reality that sets in, that this is going to be a long slog, a very difficult path in order to actually advance freedom. Because sure, you can gain your freedom, but then you have to really build a country, build an infrastructure, and that takes time.
That's exactly right. I mean, let's face it, Libya has not received a lot of attention from the West. Some, but not very much. Remember, part of that, the French government changed. Nicolas Sarkozy was the big advocate of the war in Libya. He's been voted out of office. His successor probably doesn't care much about Libya or focus much about it at all. The British government has run into some trouble domestically since their advocacy. President Obama was never the leader. He was very consciously deciding to support Britain and France. So no one country, no one group, no one alliance had the lead in the post-Gaddafi Libya. And this is what happened.
But has it really been the lack of attention, or to your point, the lack of infrastructure, or has it been, to your point, that these radical groups that have been, sort of been lurking the shadows, if you will, through these, through the Gaddafis and the Mubaraks, and now that they are gone, this vacuum, it's sort of like we go back to how we talked about the devil you know versus the devil you don't. They're there.
It's all of the things you said. In a post-Gaddafi Libya, with no system of civic governance, there were bound to be places in which Islamic extremists could jump and exploit. That's one point, definitely. Would there be less such places if the international community was involved more and trying to help them build? Yes, there'd be less. So that's, it's both things.
But I've had the pleasure of knowing you now for a year, Jamie. We had conversations when Libya was in transition at the very beginning. Doesn't this simply highlight, I think what Roland is asking, what Brooke is pointing out, that we need to ask these questions such as, what comes after the bad guy before we take action? We can't wait to these moments to be discussing these items. These need to happen before we send in military action.
Well, at the time, you may remember, I was much more of an advocate of the United States playing the leading role in Libya. I felt that we had an opportunity here. It was a limited involvement in militarily, that we should have played the leading role. And in that case, America would be in a stronger position to insist on actions from the rebels inside Libya, would be in a stronger position to insist on action from our allies if we had borne a larger share of the burden, and would have been more likely to stay focused. But one of the problems of being a diffuse, multinational, multi-headed operation is nobody feels in charge. And when Sarkozy left office, particularly, there's been no individual who's been in charge of worldwide. And that's why I believed we would have had more leverage, more involvement, and less likely to have this sort of problem had we led in Libya.
We're going to pause here for a second. We're covering the death right now of Ambassador Chris Stephens in Libya by rocket attack. Stay with us. We'll have more coverage coming up.